It's lovely to meet you, and thank you so much for taking time in your busy week to talk to me. And of course, you're a chaplain here at the University of Roehampton, so the last 2 years will have presented particular challenges. How has lockdown been for you?
Well, I would say, like for everybody, lockdown has been intense, but in different ways. For me, both my husband and I suddenly found ourselves sharing a space and working from home. And to add an extra layer to that, our eldest child had a chronic illness, which at the time was undiagnosed and was quite unwell. And our youngest child had some emerging additional learning needs, alongside that very real concern for the health of family and friends, and our concern for the world as the pandemic hit, and we didn't know how long people would be in lockdown and what the situation was for other people and what it was going to mean long term.
And during that time, what did you find yourself missing the most?
I think for me, the thing I missed the most was gathering, that simple gift of like meeting together with other people. As a university chaplain, a lot of my role is relational, and it involves interacting in physical spaces. And of course, that was impossible all of a sudden. And whilst we're really grateful for technology and Zoom, which enabled us to stay in contact, often with people who felt really isolated, I think there's something very specific and essential about our creativeness and our need to be together and to look one another in the eye and to smell and touch and sense people around us. For me, that's really at the core of the incarnation. It's at the heart of Holy Communion, which is a full sensory and gathering experience. And so to suddenly not have that felt like a great loss.
And were there other things that you missed?
I'm constantly overwhelmed with the students I interact with about how they hold very complex personal situations amidst their commitment to studying. And they often hold multiple low-paid jobs that are on 0 hours contract. So I was very conscious that the pandemic was hitting our student population in a serious and very hard way, and often a way that isn't reported in the media. And the university here is great. We put a lot of support in place for our students, and we have wonderful teams that support student well-being. But actually, the not being able to be physically present and offer space and hospitality and journeying to people going through incredibly challenging and difficult times was a sort of a bereavement within my sense of calling and who I am as a chaplain. And I think we have the most amazing sort of generation coming up who have coped with an awful lot, and we can find real inspiration from them.
And in that time of loss, were there also things that you gained?
Well, the mischief maker in me wants to say I gained more grey hair and a larger laundry pile and more information about how to use online interactive forms and social media than I ever desired to know about. In all seriousness, I'd say I gained a greater sense of perspective. And within that, a couple of things really. A real and growing acceptance that there's less out there that is within my own control than I would like to think and comfortable believing. And I think that's a spiritual element for growth, and one that is a lifelong journey, I think, for us all. And I suppose I realised in lockdown that we were suddenly faced with two children who were already having challenges in the world, who had to cope with the world suddenly closing down around them. And for us as adults, that was a quite scary thing, but to help navigate children through that felt like a huge responsibility. I think quite early on, I recognised that the goals that were coming in from school and the regular goals that we had in life just had to be laid aside. And that actually what was important was one another in each moment, making sure that we took time to breathe and to not be anxious. And it seems like a very strange world we live in when we have to make an active decision to not be anxious and to not feed that anxiety. But there's a lot of messaging, I think, in the world that creates that within us. And so I found parts of scripture that are about taking a breath and considering the lilies to be really, really important.
Absolutely. But I wonder if there were times where perhaps God felt particularly absent, but looking back, you can maybe see those footprints in the sand.
I wouldn't say there were times when God felt absent or I felt absent from God, but I would say that I was hugely drawn to our tradition of lament and hugely grateful to come from a faith tradition that has lament, a way of processing bewilderment and agony and grief in a faithful way, and that there is an expression within our tradition for us to faithfully witness to that pain. Because obviously there were moments for all of us when we watched the news and we listened to the stories around us and the people from within our communities who felt desperately isolated or who were going through bereavement on their own, when no other response other than lament felt appropriate or reasonable. So to be from a faith community that can hold our experiences in that way as a legitimate expression of faith was deeply important, and I think without that it would have been a great challenge.
Thank you. That's such a wonderful perspective on it. So what for you has the reconnection been like since lockdown?
I think for all of us it's been quite fragile. We're not quite certain of the future and we are learning to cope with uncertainty. In terms of my professional life, it felt like coming home a lot, that reignited a spark of my own calling. Just being able, in the first instance, to gather outside or to meet with people, it was good. And I suppose the other thing about reconnection is that I found quite aspects of it quite irritating, if I'm honest. And I'm really cautious about the type of language we use in our communities and in society, especially things around the need to catch up. And again, it's about creating anxiety and stress that somehow we're all behind or our children are all behind, when we've all been through the same experience and we've all been limited in the same ways. And I'm suspicious of these goals that we generate for ourselves and targets which give us a sense of fulfillment, but they're man-made, and when they don't work for us because the situation has changed, I'm not quite sure why we don't change the goals. And I think our children are more than achievement generators. They're so much more than that, and all of us are still coming to terms with what have happened. We're not through it, we're still in it. And so I think the language around sort of healing and wholeness is much more helpful than a language of we need to catch up and we need to do this, we need to do that. And again, I suspect that is around giving us a full sense of being in control.
And I wonder where you feel the cross is for you in all of this.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a big question. I think the cross is hugely significant within this. And in three ways, really. The first way is within our agony and our grief. And, Jesus was crucified outside the city with the marginalised, with the rejected. And for me, that speaks to a God who is with those who have suffered disproportionately within the pandemic. And we know that many of our marginalised communities have been disproportionately affected. And whilst we see in our news cycles that our politicians and leaders are ignorant of that through the parties they've held and the not knowing really how awful that is to hear, from our faith perspective, we have a God who isn't ignorant of the suffering of others, but is hugely present within it, within that agony, within that pain, in a very real way. And I think that's incredibly important. The second way I see the cross through it is in the tomb. And the pandemic has echoes of that for me, that we were almost literally entombed in our own homes. We were in a really dark place, and we didn't know when our stones would be rolled away, when the door would open. There was a not knowing in that. But to have in Christ a divine presence in that darkness of the tomb with us, I find is hugely important. So we're not rushing through to light, because that is out of control, as we've explored, but we have one that sits with us in that unknowing, and to know that God is with us there is hugely comforting, to me at least. And then the third way is the rolling away of the stone. And we didn't emerge in one great streak of light. It was a slow unfolding and unfurling from our homes, from our tombs, and a not knowing and a coming out slowly and carefully. And there is hope there in emerging, but there are scars also. And so that Christ emerged from the tomb bearing scars and walking with those scars, I think, speaks to us in a profound level.
And building on from what you've just said, where do you see the resurrection hope in all of this?
And I think we're not very good at coping with imperfection. We see scars and pain and hurt as weakness. And my hope would be that we don't cover that up, but that we learn to bear those scars and gather strength from them, because I think that's their real power. And that through being able to bear our scars as communities and as individuals, that we draw both strength from that, but also some of the freedom that helps us live more fully and honestly. And we talked a lot in lockdown about coming out and doing things in a different way, about learning the lessons from lockdown, about making more time for the things that were important in life. And I think there's a real opportunity to come out with a different mindset, but not if we try and cover up the pain that we have experienced and the learning about hope and endurance and loss that we've had within that. So that would be where my resurrection hope is in that. And for me personally, that's played out in community. And we all, going through lockdown, had a new appreciation of the communities in which we lived and the people who played different roles in that community. And I'd love to see that really inform the way that we carry on living and not, again, become forgotten as time moves on. As a chaplain, we've emerged out of lockdown here at Southlands College to celebrate our 150th year. Now, Southlands College was a Methodist heritage college, so that's hugely significant that we've reached our 150th year. And there's been many, many changes to the college life during that time. But the college carries with it this core sense of calling to offer education as a means to human flourishing. And we're very proud that many of our students here go on to graduate with a real intention to make the world a better place. And so a lot of my resurrection hope is also in our upcoming generations, that they are resilient and remain with a capacity for joy even through this very difficult time, and come through it with a sense of still wanting to make the world a better place. And I think we can gain a lot of inspiration from them. And I would encourage us to hold the students very much in our thoughts and our prayers.
So thank you so much for these really deep and beautiful reflections. It's been so lovely hearing them.